The cell was dark, too dark for a prince. Stone walls oozed with dampness, carrying the stench of mold, sweat, and something far worse. The slow rot of a boy who should have lived as a king. History remembers kings for their victories, their golden thrones, their mighty armies. But what about the princes who never sat upon the throne? What about those who were erased before they could ever be crowned? This is not the story of a glorious dynasty. It is the story of a boy who once played in palace courtyards laughing under banners of silk, until his laughter was silenced, locked away by the very man who had given him life, his father, the emperor. To the world, the official records were clear. This prince simply fell ill and died young. A tragedy, yes, but nothing unusual in a time of disease and war. At least that is what the empire wanted people to believe. But behind sealed doors and forbidden scrolls lies another story. A darker one. A story of betrayal, decay, and cruelty so profound that even centuries later, it seeps like poison through the cracks of history. What truly happened to the forgotten prince? Was he a threat so dangerous that his father condemned him to rot alive in a dungeon? Or was his slow death part of a secret far more terrifying than we can imagine? Tonight we open the gates of that prison, and we step inside. Before the chains, before the darkness, there was light. The boy prince was born into a palace that glittered like a jewel in the empire's crown. Marble corridors echoed with the sound of musicians. Incense drifted lazily through silk-draped halls, and servants bowed so low that their foreheads kissed the floor. From the moment of his birth, the court whispered of destiny. He was not just a child, he was the future. The emperor, his father, looked upon him with pride but also with suspicion. A ruler who had clawed his way to the throne knew better than to trust anyone completely, not even his own blood. To such a man, love was always shadowed by fear. As the boy grew, signs of brilliance began to show. He learned faster than his tutors, memorized battle strategies before he could hold a sword, and spoke with a sharpness that unsettled even the most seasoned ministers. In the courtyard, while other children played, he would stand still, gazing at the banners that rippled in the wind, as if he already understood the weight they carried. The court adored him. The people whispered of him as a blessing. But in the emperor's mind, this adoration was dangerous. Too much light could cast too long a shadow. Slowly, the warmth of a father's gaze turned cold. At banquets, the emperor's smile tightened when the boy's laughter rose too loud. In council, his eyes narrowed when ministers praised the child's intelligence. What begins as admiration can, in the heart of a paranoid ruler, transform into fear. And so, the seeds of betrayal were planted. The boy's golden childhood was nothing more than a prelude to the darkness that awaited. The cell was not meant for a prince. It was a stone box, damp and suffocating, with walls that sweated moisture like a living beast. The air was thick with the stench of rot, mold clinging to the stones, stale straw soaked with urine, and the metallic tang of rusted chains. No incense, no silk, no music of the court, only the endless dripping of water from the ceiling, counting time like a cruel clock. At first, the boy prince tried to cling to his dignity. He sat straight, reciting lessons under his breath, whispering to himself the verses of poetry his tutors once praised. But the darkness has a way of peeling dignity apart. His body began to change. Food was scarce, crusts of bread that tasted of mildew, bowls of water that carried the dirt of rats. His skin, once radiant under golden robes, grew pale and blotched with sores. His teeth loosened. His gums bled. Each cough rattled through the chamber, echoing like a death knell. Worse than the physical pain was the silence, broken only by sounds that may or may not have been real. At night he swore he heard voices, faint whispers crawling through the cracks in the wall. Sometimes it was the laughter of courtiers he once knew, sometimes the soft crying of children he never met, and sometimes, more terrifying still, it was his father's voice, hissing his name through the dark. Sleep brought no escape. Dreams twisted into fever visions, banquet tables crawling with worms, soldiers saluting him with skeletal hands, the throne melting into a pool of blood. He would wake screaming, clawing at his own skin, convinced that insects were burrowing beneath it. The boy, who had once been the promise of an empire, was now reduced to a shadow of himself. His hair fell out in clumps, his nails cracked and blackened. He smelled of decay even before death arrived, the living body becoming its own tomb. And yet the cruelest torment was not death itself, but the waiting. Each day the prince wondered if this would be the last. Each night he prayed for an end that never came. For years the boy prince's fate was shrouded in silence. Official chronicles recorded only a few cold lines. The prince fell ill and passed away. But beneath those words, hidden in fragments of forbidden accounts, lay another story, one that was never meant to see the light of day. Whispers began to surface from forgotten letters and fading testimonies. Some guards hinted that the prince was not simply struck by illness but left to wither in the darkness of his cell. Meals were delivered irregularly, sometimes spoiled, sometimes withheld altogether. The silence of the dungeon was broken only by his faint cries, cries that disturbed the peace of the palace above. To solve the problem, walls were reinforced, thicker and colder, ensuring his voice would never reach sympathetic ears again. Those who had glimpsed him during this time described a figure almost unrecognizable. His once princely stature had diminished, his face hollow, his eyes shadowed with exhaustion. Yet these witnesses soon vanished themselves. Some were reassigned to distant provinces, others dismissed without reason. Their words were erased before they could take root. The most chilling detail comes from an obscure, half-burned record discovered centuries later. It claimed that when the young prince was finally brought out, he was a shell of who he had been, frail, silent, his spirit broken long before his body gave way. To those who saw him, it was as though he had aged decades in a handful of years. And yet, in the polished version of history, none of this existed. The emperor's scribes wrote of natural causes, presenting the boy's death as a tragedy of fate rather than the result of cruelty. The empire had succeeded in turning torment into silence and silence into myth. But silence has cracks, and through those cracks whispers still slip, carrying the unbearable question: was the prince truly a victim of fate, or of deliberate design? The death of the boy prince did not simply close a chapter of royal intrigue, it left cracks across the empire itself. For an emperor to imprison his own child was more than an act of cruelty. It was a symbol of how absolute power devoured even bloodlines. Court officials, once proud of their dynasty's stability, began to whisper in private. If a prince could be locked away to rot, then what protection did any minister, general, or noble truly have? Fear tightened its grip around the palace. Loyalty no longer came from respect, but from terror. Every official bowed lower, spoke softer, and erased any thought of defiance before it could ever form. Beyond the palace walls, the story twisted into rumor and superstition. Some believed the prince's restless spirit haunted the corridors of the fortress where he died. Others claimed the crops failed and storms worsened in the years following, interpreting nature itself as punishment for the emperor's sin. To common people, the tale became a quiet warning. Unchecked power poisons not only families but entire nations. Politically, the boy's erasure also meant that succession grew fragile. Rivals and distant relatives circled the throne like vultures, ready to exploit the gap his death created. Generations later, historians would point to this moment as one of the roots of the dynasty's eventual instability, proof that when rulers silenced heirs, they also silenced the very future of their empires. And yet, perhaps the darkest consequence was silence itself. Records were carefully crafted, witnesses erased, and truth buried. The empire survived, but its survival was built on secrets. And secrets, like ghosts, never truly rest. Centuries have passed since the boy prince drew his last breath in that forgotten chamber. Yet his shadow lingers still. His name rarely appears in official histories. His life reduced to a footnote, but whispers of his suffering survive in folktales, ghost stories, and the uneasy silence of crumbling palaces. Perhaps that is the cruelest fate of all, to die not as a warrior in battle, not as a ruler on the throne, but as a forgotten child, abandoned within walls meant to protect him. The stone that sealed his prison may have been broken long ago, yet the questions remain sealed tighter than any lock. Was the emperor truly protecting his throne, or simply destroying the one person who could expose his fears? Did the boy's spirit ever find peace, or does it still wander the ruins seeking justice that never came? The silence of history is deafening. No trial, no burial recorded, no monument to mark the place where a son was erased by his own father. Only gaps. Gaps that echo louder than words ever could. And so, The story of the Forgotten Prince reminds us of a chilling truth. The greatest prisons are not built of stone, but of silence. And sometimes the loudest cries are the ones history refuses to write down. And so the tale of the Forgotten Prince ends not with justice but with silence. A silence crafted by power, sharpened by fear, and sealed by the very man who should have been his protector, his own father. But what do you think? Was the prince simply a victim of cruel politics, an innocent crushed beneath the weight of a paranoid empire? Or is there more to the story, details lost, erased, or deliberately hidden from us? Could it be that his slow death was not just punishment, but a warning to anyone who dared challenge the throne? I want to hear your thoughts. Share them in the comments below. And if you wish to uncover more hidden truths, more shadows of history, and more stories the world tried to erase, make sure you subscribe to Torture Relics, because this is only the beginning.